Hello, I'm Dr. Clint Sexton, and today I'd like to talk about the TSH blood test. This test is commonly performed as part of a thyroid panel, and I want to cover some of the key points in terms of what it is, where it comes from, and how this ties into the importance of your thyroid panel. But I also want to point out that sometimes we give it a little too much importance. So let's just start with what it is and where it comes from. So TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, and that comes from your pituitary gland, which is in your head, and it makes this hormone, the TSH, so it can go to the thyroid gland and tells the thyroid gland to make the hormone T4. So when we're talking about TSH, we're talking about a bit of a loop here. So the level of T4 being produced by the thyroid is going to essentially go back up to the pituitary gland, where it's going to sense the levels of T4, and that's going to dictate the levels of TSH being made. So we have the hormone regulation part of it that's going to tie into what your TSH values will be. But we have another very important part to this, and that is right above the pituitary gland. It's a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is also making a hormone called TRH, and that hormone will also stimulate your pituitary gland to make TSH. So your pituitary gland has to take in several variables in terms of how much TSH it's going to make, which will then result in the thyroid hormone production, T4, at the thyroid gland. So many different things are going to influence this. So let's just start back, and let's start at the top and work our way down. So we're going to go back up to the hypothalamus. So if you have things like increased stress or increased inflammation or other variables going on in the body, that's going to affect the hypothalamus. That's going to affect how much TRH it's making, which again stimulates TSH production right below that in the pituitary gland. So we have to think about the environment of the brain as part of this, okay? So that's one half of the main regulatory factors. The other is, again, the level of T4. So let's walk through this a little bit. So we get the TSH, and it's going from the pituitary to your thyroid gland. And TSH will tell your thyroid gland, let's make some T4, okay? So then the T4 goes out into your bloodstream, and it gets back up to the pituitary gland, but there's a little step that needs to take place here. So your pituitary gland has certain enzymes. They're called deiodinase enzymes. Now, these enzymes are found throughout the body, but there are some unique to the pituitary gland, okay? And it takes that T4 that it got from the thyroid and turns it into T3, all right, in the pituitary gland for itself as a guide. So it's not just the amount of T4, it's also how that T4 is being turned into T3. And that influences, that's really what the pituitary gland is going to look at, okay, in terms of, well, should I make some more TSH or not? So let's just take a step back now. So we have two main things driving this, really. It's up above in the brain, the hypothalamus making a hormone, telling the pituitary gland to make TSH. We also have your level of thyroid hormone, okay? So generally, the higher the level of your thyroid hormone, the lower your TSH will go. Okay, and vice versa. If your thyroid hormone's going lower, your TSH is going to go higher. So it's kind of like a seesaw. All right, thyroid hormone levels go up, TSH goes down. Okay, and it goes the other way. If they go high, thyroid hormone goes high, TSH goes down, and vice versa. Okay, so that's how we want to look at this. Now, unfortunately, a great deal of importance is put on the TSH test. Sometimes that's the only test that gets run in a thyroid panel, which is a very limited view, because we haven't even looked at the levels of thyroid hormone at all. So it's just one of the pieces of this whole thyroid and metabolism puzzle we want to look at, and we have to understand that the TSH does not always give us a good reflection of what your levels of thyroid hormone are. Meaning, when I say thyroid hormone, I'm talking about that T4 and T3 from the thyroid gland. So it's just a part of it. So a common test that's done is called the TSH with a reflex to FT4. F means free T4. We'll talk about that more in another video. But the point here is that sometimes only the TSH gets run, and that's not really sufficient And then so what that means by reflexing, so let's say if your TSH is too high or too low, then this FT4, this free T4 test will be run. But there's many more tests related to the thyroid. So it's not just the TSH. You have TSH, you have T4, you have T3, you have free T3, you have free T4, you have thyroid hormone antibody. There's a lot more to this, but the whole point is we don't want to rely too heavily on just what the TSH is. You want to look at it in relation to the other hormones. So let's just do a really basic example with this. So if, let's say your TSH is high, normally you'd go, oh my gosh, that means I'm not making enough thyroid hormone. A high TSH will often go with hypothyroidism. Well, you'd have to really go look at the hormone levels of your T4 and your T3 to see if that's actually an accurate assessment of what's going on. So we can't rely too heavily on the pituitary gland's interpretation or evaluation of what your thyroid hormone levels are, okay? So you use it, yes, it's important, but it's important when viewed with other tests, you get a full picture of what's the thyroid doing? Is my problem actually related to my thyroid or not? Or is it something else? Maybe the symptoms you're experiencing aren't because of your thyroid. So you need to know, is it or is it not? And so hopefully this explains a little bit more about the TSH, what it means, where it's coming from, and what it's supposed to reflect in your testing.